I don't like this at all. Not like this, Sam. I am. Why is this being so weird? Very interesting. Very interesting. Yeah, we already did this, remember? Welcome to TikTok Live, where select stream. There we go. Beautiful. Ox. Very weird, man. Why? Why? Pop out. Hopefully that works. It seems there are some problems with your live quality. Lies. Yeah, we got it. We got it. Good evening, sir. I hope this is working right because I messed something up. All right. Well, if you're watching this recording later, we have a Discord. There is a link to the Discord in the pin chat on YouTube. If you're watching this on TikTok now, because technology is cool, there is not. However, there is a link on my profile on TikTok. So go over yonder and find that there link, and then you're good. Pastora. Pastora. It feels like forever. What a treat. I'm returning from my retirement today. I'm so glad you're back. That's lovely. It's so good to see you. Yeah, so here's the thing, Ghost. I got another email, and so I th- I think I have to try to start a new channel. I think I have to because I think that it's not sending out anything, and I just don't see why, dude. It's such a small channel. There's like freaking 10 people that watch this crap. I don't know why, but I think notifications are not working, and I think that now they're being pretty blunt about the fact that it's just the videos are not going to show up. So if you open YouTube, it's not going to say like, "Hey, someone's live right now." It just doesn't show up. So I think just the people who very normally come and know the times and whatever, which is a handful of people, and you got something going on tonight, like it's nice outside most places. You're not gonna come, especially if there's no notification. So I'm gonna try to just do a different channel. I have one. I stopped, but for a while I was uploading all the videos over there too. And I guess just try that route. I don't know. I don't know. I don't really know what else to do. So if you have any advice, let me know. I'm a bit at a loss, to be completely honest. I don't know if it would. I know that some people say that they've had success with just starting a new channel. Some people have told me because of what I did with this channel, I'll never show up the way that I'm supposed to. And what they said was because my channel was like decent. If you look, I have, like there were some videos from when I was doing this before that have 100, more than 100,000 views. I think one has like 500,000, if not more. So like for a while, the channel was successful. Like it was doing well. what people are telling me is that because I stopped uploading for years, for a couple of years, um, I had a few videos in between, but like nothing consistent. They said once you do that, the channel is done. And I was like, there's no way that's true. So I just started up again, but I'm starting to think that maybe they were right. I think maybe if I started a new channel that's got no red flags from YouTube and really played the YouTube algorithm game, then maybe it would be okay. So I'm thinking about doing that. But Ruth, good to see you. Visiting friends right now. Yeah, have a good night. Nice to pop in and say hi. It's good to see you. Have a good night. Have fun. Lilith, lovely to see you too. I'm just gonna roll because I need to run at 7 o'clock exactly. But what are we in? Raj, what's going on? Anyways, link to the Discord's in the in my profile on TikTok for you guys, and it's in the description, and I'll put it in the comment section and whatever after this. Let me see. So 1 Corinthians 10. Oh, which is kind of that's right. This will be good. This was carry on from last week with some of the meat that was being sacrificed by the pagans at the altar. You had the whole Paul's whole kind of monologue about what Christians can do and what they can't do, what the whole concept of adiaphora is, the gray area, or so it seems. It's a bit of a continuation about that. So, yeah. Beautiful. Okay, so there's a discussion here of the nature of what genuine Christian leadership is, which I think is great because we've been talking about that quite a bit recently. What is a true leader? What is a Christian leader? What should they look like? How should they behave? And who should we emulate and who should we not? He makes an argument that the standard for Christian leaders is set by God alone. So he talks a bit about that, and that suffering, which is a big thing for Paul, he freaking loves it, is a hallmark of Christian ministry in general. So if you're not willing to suffer, he makes an argument that you're not really behaving as a Christian would. And then we talked recently about how all throughout Christian history, the greatest of the greats suffered in one regard or another. But then the other piece of that was one of the remarkable things about Christianity is that a lot of people throughout history, for like quite a long span of time, were killed for their faith, and they were all very happy to do it. They were all very willing to just, in horrific ways, oftentimes. Amy, good to see you. In horrific ways, be killed for their faith. They were comfortable with it. It's a testament to maybe there's something to this. Maybe you either have to be extremely deluded, or you have to be absolutely confident that you're right to die for something that other people think is not real. It's one or the other. There's no middle ground to it whatsoever. So forced. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm not even where I need to be. Here we are. So warding against idolatry. Continuation of last week. For I do not want you to be unaware, brothers, that our fathers were all under the cloud. There's a lot of Old Testament stuff here. Our fathers were under the cloud and all passed through the sea. The fathers, our fathers, is in reference to the Exodus. So the Exodus generation that came out of Egypt. It's out of Exodus. And then he says, we are all under the cloud. The cloud, most of scholarship, from my understanding, the thought is that it's to represent God's presence among the Israelites during and around the time of the Exodus. And all passed through the sea is in reference to the Red Sea, which was parted so that Moses and the Israelites could escape from the Egyptian army. Again, all of that comes from Exodus 3. And all ate the same spiritual food, and all drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank from the spiritual rock that followed them, and the rock was Christ. So the spiritual food, the food that was miraculously provided by the Spirit from the Old Testament, again, same out of Exodus 16. When the people of Israel were complaining and moaning about the lack of sustenance, about God not being there. This is one of the times, one of many times to Israel that God provided them with what was it, quail and manna. In that context, quail and manna out of Exodus 16, manna became their staple food. It was their primary food as they wandered through the desert for those 40 years. Then he said spiritual drink. During the wilderness wandering, the Israelites drank water from the rock. And Paul's message in this area, in this section, if it follows the flow of Deuteronomy. So he's tying together all of these different principles to these different stories from the Old Testament regarding suffering and regarding, he's going to push it into idolatry. So the message flows from Deuteronomy here, which chronicles Israel's, their journey through the wilderness. It's actually kind of poetic the way he puts this together if you actually break it down. So after spiritual drink, he says, for they drank from the spiritual rock that followed them, and the rock was Christ. So he's identifying Christ as the rock in obviously in a figurative way, in a figurative sense, based on his reading of the descriptions of the rock in Exodus 17 and in Numbers 21. Despite Christ's his accompaniment and provision of water in the desert, the people still complained about God's provision and rebelled against God's leadership. Constantly, honestly, if you get into it, constantly they did. It's almost funny. It's not, but it's almost funny. If you really read the Old Testament and you really read specifically the sections from, I suppose, Deuteronomy, Exodus, and Numbers, even just those, but it goes beyond that. The number of times it's almost comical how often the Israelites abandoned or betrayed God in a manner of speaking, where, oh, God's not looking out for us. He's not here for us. Where is God? Where is God? Where is God? And then God will do something. And they'll be like, oh, okay, got it. God's present. It doesn't take long before they're like, oh, where is God? Woe is us. Where is it? He's not showing up. And then he'll do something. And they're like, oh, okay. But it only lasts a little bit of time. And it's interesting, especially, and I won't rant about this, but it's interesting, especially when we talk about some of the things that we were talking about a couple weeks ago, when I made the whole case for potentially God's not as involved as he was before, regardless of kind of your views on that are irrelevant. But I find it interesting that like God was kind of showing them things that were provisions falling from the sky. Is hard to be like, oh, that didn't happen. We all saw that happen. That happened. That's a pretty miraculous thing. That's very much like, oh, wow, God is present. Something is happening here. And I find it funny how quickly the Israelites were like, where is he? Is he there? Is he real? He's not showing up. But today, we don't see manna coming from heaven. We don't see anything like that. I don't see anything like that. I guess I should say, I don't see anything like that. Maybe I'm just blind to it. Maybe I'm just a cynic. I don't know. But it kind of tracks that perhaps things like this not happening as much. It kind of makes sense to me why people have become so removed from the concept of God. If Israel fell off of the God train so quickly, so easily, when it wasn't apparent that God was acting in their lives, it doesn't really surprise me that people in 2024 don't see God acting presently in their lives. But again, maybe I'm just cynical. Maybe that's just me. Pastor, we all missed you a lot, so it's really nice to have you back. Oh, there's Nat. Looking at Jesus like, what? Even if you don't believe in him, you have to respect what he did as a person. Yeah, I mean, Jesus was a badass. If you really break it down, what did Jesus do? Who was he? He was a badass. Through and through. Total badass. So anyways, The Rock. I said I wasn't going to rant about it, and I kind of did. So despite Christ despite Christ accompanying and providing of water in the desert, the people still complained about God's provisions, and they still rebelled against God's leadership. So Paul here, now in 1 Corinthians, a long time later, from his references to Exodus and Deuteronomy and Numbers, He's urging the Corinthians, specifically here, not to follow the Israelites' example of complaining about provisions given by the rock or by Christ. So, picking back up in 5. Nevertheless, with most of them, God was not pleased, for they were overthrown in the wilderness. Translation might say struck down in the desert. Either way, same thing. The first generation who Moses delivered from Egypt, they experienced God's power, his glory, his might, all of his godliness. They experienced it. Their idolatry and their disobedience led to consequence. It led to punishment. God punished them. So Paul here to the Corinthians, who are behaving similar to Israel when they were not at their best, when they were not doing the most, he's warning them. He's warning the Christians at Corinth to avoid idolatry, because it was a problem. We've talked about that a lot, because they will come under divine wrath, is what he's saying. There will be a consequence. If you continue behaving like this, you continue doing this, there will be a consequence. It's not just going to continue like this forever with nothing happening, because they are under a different standard. As Christians, they are held to a different standard, and they will be held to a different standard with the behavior that they choose to engage in. 6, now these things took place as examples for us, that we might not desire evil as they did. Including all the believers, not just Paul or Apollos or Cephas. It wasn't just the ministry leaders. They took place as examples for us, all of us, all Christians, that we might not desire evil as they did. Do not be idolaters, as some of them were, as it is written. The people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. So, in Exodus 32, where the Israelites, they put together the golden calf, right? They fashion the golden calf, and then they worship the golden calf. This is idolatry. These idolaters, what happened to them? What was the consequence? They died. They were killed. So that was the consequence for their idolatry. So Paul's bringing it up, and he's using that event to warn the Corinthian believers to avoid being a part of the pagan festivals, the pagan meals, and the pagan temple that they were involved in. He's urging them to not be. And so he's making an argument that those festivals, those temples, that behavior, that activity, it not only is idolatry, but it will lead to continued idolatry, which, if you remember, is the crux of this entire letter, is that the Corinthians are straying outside of the church. They're going to pagan temples. They're worshiping in pagan temples. They are communally involved with people in pagan temples, and then they're bringing all that garbage back into the church, and they're slowly shifting it into the Christian way of life. Their own area. They're bringing it all in, and they're trying to implement it in small ways. Okay, that's good enough. 8, we must not indulge in sexual immorality, as some of them did, and 23,000 fell in a single day. This is a really good example, actually, of why, in my opinion, if you were to just read chapter 10 and not go back to the Old Testament at all, I don't know how you could say that you actually understood what it said. Unless you're a biblical scholar, I guess. I don't remember all of this. I have to look back at all of it. Great example. You can't just read the Bible. You have to be ready to stop often and go look at something else, whether it's in the Bible or out of the Bible, but most of it should be in the Bible. In this example, we would have gone back to at least 15, I think probably more, between 15 and 30 verses from the Old Testament to have any idea what he's talking about, unless you really know your Old Testament, and you might. But to have the absolute detail down to a point, you'd have to. Otherwise, you're reading the Bible wrong, in my opinion. You're reading it wrong. Don't read the Bible wrong. Because all of this is like, it's a lot, man. It's a lot. So we must not indulge in sexual immorality, as some of them did. And 23,000 fell in a single day. What were the 23,000? Leave that for a minute. But some of them committed sexual immorality, or we must not indulge in sexual immorality, depending on your translation. It's referring, still, even that is in reference to Numbers. That could come across very much like he's just again talking to the Corinthian church, because he's been talking to the Corinthian church about sexual immorality for 10 chapters. It's not. In context, you need to take it where it actually was from. And in this context, he's talking about Numbers 25, when Israelite men engaged in sexual relations with the Midianite, female religious prostitutes. Sounds kind of like Corinth. Female religious prostitutes. An issue with Corinth was they were sleeping with pagans, oftentimes pagan prostitutes. So what did God do? He sent a plague. Maybe you remember all of that. I don't know. But if you don't, anytime you see a note when you're reading the New Testament towards the Old Testament, you need to stop, take a second, look it up on your phone or whatever, and go back. Because 9 out of 10 people will just read right past indulge in sexual immorality, thinking it was about current time, about Corinthian time, what they were dealing with at Corinth. It's not. He's talking about Numbers 25. Super important, in my opinion. It's very important. And then the 23,000 were those who died from the plague. So that ties together. So you have indulge in sexual immorality, specific freaking reference to Numbers, which included female religious prostitutes. And it also included the judgment that came from that, which was a plague. So then when we read 23,000 fell in a single day, it makes perfect sense, because that is the number of people that fell from the plague that was the response to the Israelite men sleeping with female religious prostitutes. That's a lot of context in a sentence. Quite a bit. 9, we must not put Christ to the test. That's general. He's generally saying we should not be committing evil acts or doing anything that should be or would be seen as evil to see whether God will respond in judgment or not. We shouldn't be doing evil things to see what happens. As some of them did, he continues, and were destroyed by serpents. Nor grumble, as some of them did, and were destroyed by the destroyer. Here's where we get into interesting stuff. So, nor grumble, Korah's rebellion, and the Israelites grumbling against Moses and Aaron. It's another reference to Numbers 16, grumbling against God, despite God's continued providing for them. Every time, like I said, every time they complain and grumble, God shows up. It's not on their time, but he shows up, and then they're good. And then they grumble, and then they're good. So despite his continued response to them, providing for them, provisions for them, it was very typical of the Israelites in the wilderness to still complain. Exodus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, it's all over. It's all over. So, nor grumble, as some of them did, and they were destroyed by the destroyer. I would love to hear anybody who has a theory about the destroyer. The most common, I would say, from my personal understanding, is it's an implication that God's judgment in Numbers 16 was carried out by an angel. It makes a bit of sense. You can look through Exodus 12. There is also 2 Samuel 24, as well as Psalm 78. I think it's a reasonable answer. There's not a whole lot of context beyond it. So I'd be curious if anybody has I don't want to call it conspiracy theory, but I guess a non-academic theory of who or what the destroyer is. I've heard Satan too. In context of the Old Testament, I don't know if that's the best answer. Personally, Abaddon. Huh. Why do you say that? Or just the obvious? Is there anything deep to it? I'm trying to pull this up for everybody. Hold on. So go set Abaddon. I wanna pop this up here real quick. And then I'm not gonna be able to. So I will just read it for you guys. Hold on. I guess I can show it to TikTok so you guys can see there. All right. So Apollyon. The Hebrew term Abaddon, meaning destruction or doom, and its Greek equivalent, Apollyon. It's Koine Greek. It's the Greek of the New Testament. They appear in the Bible as both a place of destruction and an angel of the abyss. In the Hebrew Bible, Abaddon is used with reference to a bottomless pit, often appearing alongside the place of Sheol, meaning the resting place of the dead peoples. In the book of Revelation of the New Testament, an angel called Abaddon is described as the king of an army of locusts. His name is first transcribed in Koine Greek, Revelation 9:11, whose name in Hebrew is Abaddon, was the quote. There's additional notes not present in the Greek text, some Latin references. In medieval Christian literature, Abaddon's portrayal diverges significantly. As seen in the Song of Roland, an 11th century epic poem, Abaddon is depicted as part of the fictional Trinity, alongside Meom and Termagant, which the poem attributes to religious practices of Muslims. Interesting. Ghost said, because Abaddon was also said to be the destroyer of Egypt with the plagues. I don't think it's a bad answer. I think in context that would make sense. To be more specific, I think that would make sense. So I guess question, would you consider that an angel? Would you consider that an angel? Abaddon, would that be considered an angel by normal Christian perspective if you were to walk in a church and ask? Or do you consider it an angel from your specific perspective of how you see angels and the spiritual world and things like that? I'd be curious to know. Uh, Dana Lynn, I had a demon named the Destroyer manifest in a deliverance session. Interesting. Ghost said, I think what it actually means is God sent a message by destroying something through various means. I don't know about that. Unless I'm misunderstanding. I think what it actually means is God sent a message by destroying something through various means. I don't know. You'd have to explain more. I'm curious though. If you care to explain, you can put it on Discord or whatever you want to do. From a specific perspective, angels are just messengers. Yeah. So that's why I said maybe from like your perspective, use a different word, but entities from the other side, or I don't know how else to say it, because I know we get stuck in the semantic game sometimes, because I'm very used to like speaking in normal Christian terminology, and I think sometimes we talk past each other because of that. So I don't mean just messengers. The normal, like in this context, when from my understanding, when scholars talk about the destroyer here, that it was carried out by an angel in Numbers 16, I don't think they're talking about like what the normal Christian perspective of what an angel is, or in reference to a messenger. I think it's more of a reference to an entity beyond this reality, personally. Yeah, if you want to put it in Discord like later or another day, you can just tag me in it or shoot me a text. But because I'm curious to see what you actually think about that. In case anybody wants to look into this more, the verses again. There's Exodus 12. Or the sections. Exodus 12, 2 Samuel, and then in 2 Samuel 24, and then in Psalm 78 is where you'll get the context, the backing context for the destroyer out of, and it was verse 10 in 1 Corinthians 10. Going on, 11. Now these things happened to them as an example, but they were written down for our instruction, on whom the end of the ages has come. Therefore, let anyone who thinks that he stand take heed lest he fall. So some of the Corinthians did not consider themselves in danger. They didn't consider themselves in a state of immorality when they were participating or practicing in idolatry in general, but in this context, the feasts, the idol feasts. So again, just to say this again, because a bunch of people are in TikTok now and I don't know them. Biggest problem in Corinth. You could boil it all down to idolatry. Sexual idolatry, physical idolatry, and specifically idolatry that had to do with pagan temples in their geographical area. So the Christians in Corinth were practicing Christianity, and then they were also practicing paganism. They were going to temples, they were communing with pagans, they were sleeping with pagans, they were engaging in prostitution with pagans. So that they were very much consumed by the pagan world still. And then they were coming back, in our context, coming back to church on Sunday. So they're out in the world Monday through Saturday at strip clubs, doing OnlyFans. I'm giving very stupid examples to prove a point. Doing things like that, buying, selling drugs, doing all of the wrong things that you could do in your current culture. And then coming to church on Sunday and bringing that with you. Trying to change scripture to align with your life outside of God, which in a way we still see today. We see scripture bastardized by people who preach things and by congregations who believe those things that they're not just not biblical, they're anti-biblical. They're straight up against what the Bible says. And so we do gymnastics to pretend that we are exegeting these things properly when we're not. It was the same type of thing. So Paul has to warn them that you are not above the consequence, and you are in danger if you continue participating in the idol feasts, because they were going out and they were participating in idol feasts with the pagans. 13, no temptation has overtaken you that is not common to man. God is faithful, and he will not let you be tempted beyond your ability. But with the temptation, he will also provide the way of escape, that you may be able to endure it. This is a very famous verse. Most Christians know this verse. So picking it apart. Scripture shows God testing the faith of his followers. Genesis is a really good example. Job is another good example. In Job, he allowed other heavenly beings or other beings from beyond this reality. He allowed them to tempt Job in that example. So the temptation facing the Corinthians is not new. It's not different. They're not special. So he's encouraging them to resist it. What you guys are dealing with, it's been around forever. The temptation that is before you has been before everybody. So you need to remove yourself from it. That God will always provide a way of escape. You're not glued to it. You're not stuck to it. You can always pull away from it. It's the best modern example, in my opinion, is like porn. You don't have to watch porn. Nobody on the planet has to watch porn. Zero. Nobody. So just stop. Just stop. You can just pull away from it. And then you are removed from it. And there is a way. Don't type it in. There is a way. There's applications that will literally block you from being able to access it, and will send an email to somebody to help hold you accountable. There are a lot of things that can be done. And even back then, he's like, there's no reason you have to do this. You'll never be tempted beyond your ability, but with temptation, he will also provide a way of escape, that you may be able to endure it, which I think is absolutely true. 14, therefore, my beloved, flee from idolatry. If I speak as to sensible people, judge for yourself what I say. The cup of blessing that we bless, is it not a participation in the blood of Christ? The cup of blessing, it's a reference to the Lord's Supper out of Matthew. So the symbolism surrounding the blood of Jesus Christ, right? That we bless, is it not a participation in the blood of Christ? So when they all partake in what we today call, most denominations call communion, in the cup's contents, in the blood of Jesus Christ, specifically if you're Catholic, but other denominations do it too, they identify themselves as a member of the covenant. is kind of it's the symbolism behind it, or is the theory behind the symbolism. The bread that we break, is it not a participation in the body of Christ? These are all, by the way, some of the biggest verses used in terms of the Eucharist, whether you're Catholic or not. But any even non-denominational churches oftentimes do communion, but they do it randomly, or they do it a couple times a year, which I don't really understand. If you're going to do it, do it. Otherwise, don't. If it is what it, if you believe the Eucharist, so I apologize, but if you believe the Eucharist is the literal body and blood of Jesus Christ, why would you not do it every week? I at least respect Catholics for being consistent. If that's what you believe, if you believe in transubstantiation, which is the process of bread and wine or grape juice becoming actually the body and blood of Jesus Christ, not just symbolism, literal. If you believe in transubstantiation, you would do it every service. I would think. I don't know. I've never heard a good response to why we don't. But I've been to plenty of non-denominational churches that just did it whenever, randomly. They'll be like, oh, we're doing the Eucharist today. Okay, why? What's the reason? I've never understood it. But so the other part, though, of the Lord's Supper was the bread. It was the body, Jesus Christ's body, also out of Matthew. So by them partaking in the bread, believers, Christians, it's a testament to the union with Christ, the unity between believers and Jesus Christ, not just his death, but also the achievement brought about by the resurrection. Symbolism. 17, because there is one bread, we who are many are one body, for we all partake in the one bread. Consider the people of Israel. Are not those who eat the sacrificed participants in the altar? So he's talking about the idolatry again. 19, what do I imply then? That food offered to idols is anything, or that an idol is anything? He's being sarcastic to a point. Not usual part of Paul sarcastic, but slightly sarcastic. So he's warning about the food that was sacrificed to idols, that gets sacrificed to idols in the market at Corinth. And it's based on chapter 8, when we really got into the whole, can you eat the meat at the market? Can you not eat the meat at the market? What are we supposed to do? So we're not going to go into that again. But basically, he conceded that for the sake of appearance, it would be better to avoid the food because of the whole concept of weak Christians and strong Christians. It is probably best to avoid those things due to the way that it might look to those who are not as strong as you. So it's the modern, a possible modern application to understand would be like smoking or vaping, or I guess those are decent enough examples. Because I get asked that all the time. Can I vape? Can I smoke? I don't know. Can you? It comes back to here. I just send people to 1 Corinthians chapter 8. Because sure, you can. Like as a Christian, you're free to do that. There's nothing that, prohibits you from doing that. The body, but your body is a temple. That's not what it was about. The body as a temple is strictly and only about sexual immorality. You can't just make shit up. That's not how the Bible works. So there's nothing that prohibits you from smoking or vaping or using nicotine pouches or ingesting nicotine. There's nothing to say that you shouldn't do that. And we do plenty of things on a daily basis that are worse than that. One meal at McDonald's is worse than a cigarette on your health. You could absolutely argue that. Eating fast food consistently is worse than vaping consistently. You can absolutely argue that. So it's not a matter of which is worse for my health. I can't do it. No, garbage. What it comes down to is what Paul talked about in chapter 8, and it's that are you strong enough to do that and not have any negative consequences? If you are, then cool. Now, are you going to be around anybody who's maybe not as strong as you, and it's going to set a bad example for them of what maybe they shouldn't be doing? Could you cause them to fall? The words that he used were causing a brother to stumble. Could your behavior that you're strong enough to deal with, that doesn't cause anything negative for you, could it cause somebody not as strong as you to stumble? And if it can, then Paul said, don't do it. Do it in private. If you have to do it in private. If you're strong enough to do that, and you can do that in your free time, or you can do that in your off time when you're in private and nobody can stumble from your behavior, then you're adiaphora. You're free under Christ to do that. There's obviously nuance and limitations to it, but it's the general lesson that Paul gave. So for appearance, for the sake of appearance, avoid the food in this context. Avoid the food that was sacrificed to idols. But what he said is, consider the people of Israel are not those who eat these sacrifices participants in the altar. What do I imply then? That food offered to idols is anything, or that an idol is anything? What he's saying is food offered as a sacrifice to idols, who cares? They're idols. It's like if I take food and I go sacrifice it to a God that I don't believe in, that I know is not real, does it matter? No, it doesn't matter. It's not real. What a childish concept. Is an idol anything? No. So what does it matter? But could somebody seeing you do that, could it cause a problem for them? And if it could cause a problem for them, then it is something to be avoided. That's his whole point. So while the food sacrifice to idols, it carries no true spiritual significance whatsoever, still, avoiding it would save the conscience, potentially, of a weaker Christian, which makes perfect sense, which is adiaphora. Perhaps there's a time and a place. Perhaps you're not strong enough yet, but you could be, and then that thing wouldn't necessarily be negative for you, but right now it is. There's a lot of nuance to the term adiaphora, which is why I think it's so important for people to understand it. 20. No, I imply that what pagan sacrifice they offer to demons and not to God. So Paul knew that these physical idols were nothing, as he said. Is an idol anything? No. So he knew they were nothing. On their own, he knew they were nothing. He claims that the worship offered to the idols is really being offered to demons. So when Christians partake in these things, are they offering them to demons? There's nuance with that as well. I do not want you to be participants with the demons. You cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons. You cannot partake of the table of the Lord and the table of demons. Shall we provoke the Lord to jealousy? Are we stronger than he? So he's referencing the pagan altar, the table of demons is the pagan altar. It's also out of Isaiah. So in Isaiah 65, he's pulling it from there. It's contrasted with the table of the Lord, which you can find reference to in Malachi. But it's an interesting comparison. It appropriates the table imagery and it uses it in reference to the Lord's Supper, which is just interesting. The whole way that this was written by Paul, the beginning section of 10, is very unlike him. He'll make a lot of references to the Old Testament, no doubt, all the time. But the way that section specifically was written is kind of an outlier in my opinion. It's an outlier, and I'm a big Paul guy. It's different. He wrote it very different. It was very intentional. So I've always wondered kind of why that was. But it was very well put together. But he loops and he hooks a lot of different things together, and he mirrors the entire time. It's mirrored to the Old Testament the entire time. It's really interesting. We may be delusional, but at least we're consistent with the Eucharist. Yeah. I mean, I have a lot of respect for a lot of things the Catholics do. I really do. Do all to the glory of God. 23. All things are lawful. This is one of my favorite freaking parts of the entire Bible. All things are lawful. Not all things are helpful. All things are lawful. Not all things build up. That is the definition of adiaphora. It's the literal definition. I don't ever tell people to write down verses out of the Bible. Maybe I should. I don't. This is one I would write down. And I would keep it in your phone on a notepad or whatever it is that you do. quotes, or I don't know, maybe I'm weird, but I keep like quotes and things that I want to remember all in a notepad that I look at several times every single day, because I need to be reminded of things every single day. This is one of a handful of things out of the Bible that is in there. It's the definition of adiaphora. All things are lawful, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful is you are free under Christ. You are free under Christ other than breaking morality. As Go says, the golden rule. All things are lawful because you are free under Christ within the confines of the golden rule. But not all things are helpful. So can you smoke that vape? Yeah, for sure. You're free under Christ. Adiaphora. Should you? Is it helpful? No. No, it's not. One conversation I have with somebody that I've always used now as an example is that, well, what if once a week me and my wife have a bonfire in the backyard and we smoke a vape at the bonfire and it's like a bonding time for us and blah blah blah. Like, could you do it without the vape? For sure. For sure. But do they enjoy the vape? It's like a special little treat for them at the end of the week. They do it once a week. Like, that's not detrimental to your health. It's really hard to argue that. So, nuance, adiaphora. Adiaphora. It doesn't break the golden rule. Your body is a temple in terms of sexual immorality, period. And if you're going to cut anything health-wise out, it's not a vape once a week. I'm sure it's basically your entire diet for most people. It's probably you don't ever go to the gym. You don't go walk. You don't stretch. I'm sure there's 1,000 other things you should alter before telling somebody they can't smoke a vape one time a week. But it's not helpful. So all things are lawful, but they're not all helpful. All things are lawful, but not all things build up. So again, you're free under Christ. You're free under adiaphora. But is it building you up? Is it building other people up? Is it a positive thing? Is it a productive thing? Is something good happening from it? If not, probably don't do it. You could replace it with something else. Not all things build up and not all things are helpful, but they're all lawful. Why? And it's interesting. He uses quotes because the Old Testament. So we were under one law. We weren't, but Jews were under a law, Mosaic law, Levitical law. They were under law. New covenant, we're not under law. We're under, the only law you could argue we're under is moral law, which is the golden rule. That's it. So all things are lawful, but they're not all good. They're not all helpful. They don't all build up. Oh, unknowingly in terms of offering to demons. Intent is important, so it's not as bad as purposely doing it, but it's still obviously bad. And she's talking about participating in idolatry when Paul was talking about I don't want you participating with the demons. Yeah, I mean, agreed. So 24, let no one seek his own good, but the good of his neighbor, which relates to what he was talking about with adiaphora, with the freedom under Christ. Can you do it? Yes. Could somebody see and could it cause them to stumble? If so, then it is your responsibility then not to do it. Because your responsibility is not to you, it's to your neighbor. So let no one seek his own good, but the good of his neighbor. Eat whatever is sold in the meat market without raising any question on the ground of conscience. This is really important. So he's warning about the food that is sacrificed to idols. It is, again, it's based on chapter 8, which we got kind of deep in all this, where he conceded that for the sake of appearance, blah, 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 shouldn't be doing it. However, one of the things I guess to just understand is that the whole thing about why do we eat it, why should we not eat it, is that a lot of times they didn't know. So the meat would go to the pagan ceremonies. They would go to the pagan temples. They would be used in sacrificial offerings. And I think we did actually talk about this when we talked about chapter 8. But then what would happen is usually during the pagan services, they would eat a portion of it as a part of the sacrifice, as a part of the idolatry, as part of the service. And then whatever was left of the meat would go to the market. And Christians didn't know if what they were getting was sacrificed to idols or not. They were just buying meat from the open market. So there was a fear going around as some of them were trying to get their lives together and get away from paganism. They were, can we, can't we, what do we do? It sounds a lot like Christians today. So that just a little bit more context there. So eat whatever is sold in the meat market. The market, though, it would sometimes separate and it would sometimes not separate the food that was used. So in certain scenarios, you would know, and in certain scenarios, you would not know. So to be more clear, the Christians are concerned about the scenarios where they would not know. And then he's going to continue, and it's going to kind of wrap up where chapter 8 left off on specifically this. So without raising any question on the ground of conscience, important word, conscience, without raising any question on the ground of conscience, eat whatever is sold in the meat market, even though it might have been used in sacrifice to pagan gods, without being worried about your conscience. He's completely pulling the weight off of their shoulders. Eat the meat and don't trip. However, and before, for the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. If one of the unbelievers invites you to dinner and you are disposed to go, eat whatever is set before you without raising question on the ground of conscience. So if you're invited to dinner with somebody, this is in reference to eating meals in a private home or possibly in a public venue. Either way, not at a pagan temple, which was some of the context from earlier. So this is in somebody's home or at, call it a public restaurant, but obviously it was very different. But it's a private setting. It's a setting with you and some other people, a group of people or possibly one person. If you're disposed to go, eat whatever is set before you without raising question on the ground of conscience. So again, go ahead and eat it and do not be worried about your conscience. All is good. Weight lifted. 28. But if someone says to you, this has been offered in sacrifice, then do not eat it. For the sake of the one who informed you and for the sake of conscience. But whose conscience? I do not mean your conscience, but his. So, if I go to dinner with Ghost, and Ghost says this meat that I just made was used as a sacrificial offering in a pagan temple, and say there's other people there too. The Discord group is off having dinner, and Ghost is making us pagan sacrifice burgers. But he lets us know. So the whole group now knows this meat was sacrificed to idols. Paul is saying it is now my responsibility because it's been verbalized, because everybody is now aware, appearance, like he said earlier, appearance. Now that I know, it is my responsibility to say no. No. And why? For my conscience? No. I believe in God. I'm a Christian. I'm confident and I'm very confident in my faith. I'm fine. I can eat that meat, no problem. I know it's bullshit. I know that idols are not real. I know that I'm not worried about pagan practices that are trash. Not a concern for me. Good to go. However, is everybody else at the table that way? Is everybody else that's with us in the same boat as me spiritually? Maybe, maybe not. Either way, it's now your responsibility because you know, and because everybody else now knows, now you have to say no because of their conscience, because of he who offered it to you and made you aware that it was sacrificed to idols. Pagan sacrifice patties. Yes. Yes. So Ghost is the next to get sacrificed because he tried to cause all of us to stumble with his pagan sacrificial patties. But does that make sense? This is what adiaphora is that it's not black and white, but it doesn't mean you just do whatever the hell you want. It means a lot of things are absolutely circumstantial. A lot of things are very, very situational. So you can't just say, that's right, that's wrong. That's right, that's wrong. That might be right in this situation. It might be dead ass wrong in another. And this is absolute proof of that. This is an absolute great example. And if you're somebody who ever argues with people on the internet, Christian people, this is a section you need to save, and you need to really understand how to express it to somebody. Because this is proof. Being a Christian is not black and white. You can't do that. We don't have Mosaic law. We don't have Levitical law. We can't say, here's 613 laws that you have to follow. Oh, you're not following them? You're a heathen. Christianity is very different because we have moral law. Everything else is very, very gray. Who's around? Who are they? What's their background? What are their beliefs currently? It's all so nuanced. And it doesn't mean that we don't have rules we have to follow. Honestly, it means you need to be way more careful about what you're doing, because you might thoughtlessly, you might mindlessly do something because you are very strong and secure. And I do it all the time because you're very strong and secure in your faith, and you're not being conscious of who's around you. You're not being conscious for where other people are in their, to be cringe, their spiritual journey. You don't know where they are. And so you could be causing people to stumble, looking at you like, oh, that's what a Christian is? Just another hypocrite. Just another absolute hypocrite piece of Christian. I don't want to be a part of that. And that's on you for setting a bad example, for doing things that maybe you should have done alone or you should have done with your friends. Like certain ways that I talk or behave around certain people, it will be different. And that doesn't mean you're fake. It means it's like Paul said, you'll be all things to all people. It's not fake. It's assimilation. It's intelligent ministry. I won't ever be inauthentic, but I talk different around different people. The way I talk at my place of work is different than the way I talk here. And the way I talk here is different than the way I talk in the Discord private streams, because I'm very comfortable with all of you. I know that you all know me. You know who I am. You know, like my actual heart. You're not a random person walking in being like, holy God, what did I just walk into? You all know like where I'm coming from. And if I come across harshly or rude or whatever, all of you know, like, he's having a moment. It's fine. It's a rant, whatever. He's fine. I won't do that other places because other people don't know me. It's circumstantial. It's situational. It's wildly, wildly important that all Christians get that. And so you can defend your faith from this context. It's super important. So I do not mean for your conscience, but for his. Hey, they're gluten-free pagan and sacrifice patties. Oh, that's even worse. Those are negative points. You get negative points for gluten-free. For why should I love this. For why should my liberty be determined by someone else's conscience? What a savage line. Why should my liberty, why should my freedom be determined by someone else's conscience? If I partake with thankfulness, why am I denounced because of that for which I give thanks? So, whether you eat or drink, or whatever you do all to the glory of God. A little here. He brushes right over it in the beginning. And in 26, he says, for the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. What he's saying, because it was right after, eat whatever is sold in the market without raising a question on the ground of conscience. Why? Well, because the earth is God's and the fullness thereof. So why should you be able to eat meat regardless of where it was before, whether it was used in a sacrifice or not? Why? Because it's God's. You're giving credit to other entities or other things when you're saying, I'm not going to eat that meat because it was in the pagan temple. Like, dude, it's still God's. The cow was still God's. It all belongs to him. It's his. It's just an interesting note. I feel like he just drops that and then just continues on. Excuse me. Jews or Greeks, or to the church of God. Just as I try to please everyone and everything, I do not seeking my own advantage, but that of many, that they may be saved. So going off of what I was talking about before, it needs to be about other people. When we're in public, when we're in situations around other people that maybe you don't know, or you do know, and you know that they're not quite where you are, it is important to portray specific things. It is important to say no to something that maybe you would have said yes to privately. Another great example is like if you're around younger Christians, like in age and in where they are spiritually, saying no to things like drinking and smoking. I feel like such an old ass man right now, but saying no to some of those things is potentially beneficial because of the appearance. And but nuance, in other situations, it could be helpful. It's the nuanced thing about it. You could also bring people to Christ through those things in moderation, because the Bible talks about moderation, and not being drunk and not being inebriated. But still, it's very nuanced. So it's knowing your audience, know who you're around, know what they believe. It's all important in terms of just ministry in general. All right. Well, that's that. Context matters. Is the gluten context almost perfectly on time? All right. I have to run. However, first, before I do, TikTok included, there are. Oh wow, very cool. There is a poll in the announcements section for Thursday. Why did God want revenge theologically? He was a vengeful God. Gnosticism and atheism explained, and then church as a business model, because we talk about it a lot. So that's open. It'll be open for 2 more days. So if you haven't voted, vote on that. And then movie night will be this coming Saturday. It'll be same time as normal Saturday, so 7 p.m. And did the CIA discover the spiritual world? Is but one. So what it is there's a YouTube video, and I want to say it's like 45 minutes, so it's not long. So I'm hoping we can watch it and then chat. But it's under an hour, I'm pretty sure. But it's well put together. It's very interesting about this theory that the CIA has completely discovered how to engage with the spiritual world. To say it in a very simple, in a very, very simplified way. But it's really interesting. So we'll watch that, maybe chat about it afterward, and then that's that. So vote if you haven't already. And I am out of here for the night. Good night. Good night. Corinthians is the best. Lilith, it's one of my favorites, if not my favorites. All right, I'm out. Love you guys.